Case 1. Gudrun Kasperline-Enkugel, November 27, 2025, Henderson County, North Carolina. There are moments in life that feel completely safe. Moments surrounded by the warmth of family, the smell of a home-cooked meal, the sound of laughter around a table set with care. Thanksgiving is supposed to be one of those moments. It is a day built on the idea of gratitude, of belonging, of the bonds between people who share the same blood and the same history. For most families across Henderson County, North Carolina, on November the 27th, 2025, that is exactly what the day was. Ordinary, warm, unremarkable in the best possible way. But inside one home in Henderson County that evening, something was profoundly and deliberately wrong. And the person responsible for what happened next was not a stranger. She was not an intruder who came in from the dark. She was the woman who had prepared the meal, who had set the table, who had poured the wine. She was the mother. Gudrun Kasperline-Enkugel was, by outward appearance, a woman of a certain refinement. Her name carried an old-world formality that seemed to match the composed, measured way she moved through the world. Neighbors and acquaintances in Henderson County described her as private. Some said reserved. Others, in the weeks and months that followed what happened at that Thanksgiving table, would search for stronger words. Because what Gudrun Kasperline-Enkugel is alleged to have done on that holiday evening was not an act of impulse or passion. Investigators believe it was calculated, deliberate, premeditated with a precision that sent chills through the law enforcement community in western North Carolina. Henderson County sits in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a community known for its apple orchards, its art scene, and the kind of small-town connectedness where people still know their neighbors by name. It is not a place that frequently makes headlines for the kind of case that was about to unfold. When Henderson County Sheriff's investigators began receiving the calls in the final days of November 2025, they were entering territory that was deeply unfamiliar, a domestic poisoning case of a nature so methodical that it would ultimately draw the attention of state and federal toxicological experts. Here is what investigators allege happened on the evening of November the 27th, 2025. Gudrun Kasperline-Enkugel hosted a Thanksgiving gathering at her home. Among those present was her own daughter, Leila Livies. Families across North Carolina were sitting down to turkey and pie and football. The Kasperline-Enkugel household was hosting a meal as well. Wine was served. And according to investigators and toxicological analysis that would later be conducted, that wine had been deliberately laced with a chemical compound known as acetonitrile. For those unfamiliar with the substance, acetonitrile is not a household product. It is an industrial solvent, a chemical used in laboratory settings, in certain manufacturing processes, in environments where trained professionals handle it under controlled conditions. It is not something that finds its way into a wine glass by accident. What makes acetonitrile particularly insidious as a poisoning agent is what happens once the body processes it. The human metabolism converts acetonitrile into hydrogen cyanide, the same compound that has historically been associated with some of the most deliberate and premeditated poisoning cases in criminal history. The process is slow enough that symptoms may not appear immediately, giving the person responsible time and distance from the act itself. It is, in the estimation of the toxicologists who later reviewed this case, a substance that someone would have to seek out, acquire, and introduce into a beverage with full knowledge of what it would do. Leila Livies consumed the wine at that Thanksgiving table. In the days that followed, her health deteriorated rapidly. She did not survive. On December the 1st, 2025, 4 days after that holiday dinner, Leila Livies lost her life. She was Gudrun Kasperline-Enkugel's own daughter. The investigation that followed was quiet at first, as many poisoning investigations are. There are no immediate crime scenes in the traditional sense. No shattered windows. No signs of struggle. Only a woman who had been well, and then, within days, was not. Medical professionals at the facility treating Leila Livies flagged the nature of her deterioration to law enforcement. Toxicological screens confirmed the presence of substances inconsistent with any natural illness or accidental ingestion. Henderson County investigators began to build their case. What they uncovered extended far beyond that Thanksgiving table. As investigators dug deeper into Gudrun Kasperline-Enkugel's history, they encountered a name from nearly 2 decades earlier. Michael Schmidt. In 2007, 18 years before Leila Livies lost her life in Henderson County, Michael Schmidt had died under circumstances that, at the time, had not been conclusively determined to be a homicide. His death had been mourned, processed, and filed away in the way that deaths sometimes are when the full picture is not yet visible. But the investigation into the 2025 Thanksgiving poisoning prompted investigators and medical examiners to re-examine what had happened to Michael Schmidt all those years ago. What they found led them to connect his 2007 death to Gudrun Kasperline as well. Two suspected poisoning deaths, 18 years apart. The same woman at the center of both. The legal proceedings in Henderson County moved with the weight of a case that carried both enormous public interest and profound forensic complexity. Poisoning cases require layers of scientific verification, toxicological analysis, chain of custody documentation for chemical evidence, expert testimony from specialists in forensic chemistry and pharmacology. They are among the most technically demanding cases a prosecutorial team can bring before a court. And they are, for that same reason, among the cases that tend to result in the most comprehensive and carefully constructed criminal charges when the evidence supports them. At the time of this documentary's production, the case against Gudrun Kasperline was proceeding through the Henderson County court system. She faced charges connected to the death of her daughter Leila Livies, and investigators had linked her conduct to the earlier death of Michael Schmidt. The full scope of the charges and the legal proceedings remained active. What this case represents, beyond the legal proceedings, beyond the forensic details, is something that resonates deeply with anyone who has ever sat around a family table and felt completely safe. The violation at the center of this story is not just legal. It is not just criminal. It is the violation of the most fundamental expectation human beings carry into the world, that the people who are supposed to protect us would never be the ones to cause us harm. Leila Livies deserved to walk away from that Thanksgiving dinner the same way millions of Americans did, full, warm, and grateful to be alive. The Henderson County community has rallied around the memory of Leila Livies and around the pursuit of justice that her case demands. Advocates for victims of domestic harm have pointed to this case as a reminder that danger does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it sits at the head of the table. And the only protection against it is a legal system committed to pursuing the truth, no matter how long that truth has been waiting to be found. If you or someone you know has concerns about unexplained illness following a domestic incident, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-SAFE. You do not have to have proof to make a call. You only have to have concern. The justice system in Henderson County, North Carolina, is working to ensure that what happened to Leila Livies, and what is alleged to have happened to Michael Schmidt nearly 2 decades ago, does not go unanswered. Every victim deserves to have their story told. Every family deserves to know that the truth matters. And in Henderson County, the pursuit of that truth is ongoing. If this case moved you, if the story of Leila Livies stayed with you the way it has stayed with investigators and advocates across North Carolina, please take a moment right now to show your support for this channel and for the victims whose stories we tell here. Don't forget to like this video so that no story goes untold and no victim is forgotten. Your support keeps this work going. Case 2, Genevieve Ellen Springer, March 1st, 2024, Cherokee County, North Carolina. There is a particular kind of silence that descends on a small community when the unthinkable occurs. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of a neighborhood that does not yet have the words for what it is processing, a collective holding of breath before the grief sets in. Cherokee County, North Carolina experienced that silence in the first days of March 2024. And what broke it was the discovery of 2 small boys who would never again make the noise that children make, the running feet, the laughter, the questions that never stop coming. Luke and Logan Springer were 4 years old. They were twins. And on the morning of March the 2nd, 2024, their father arrived at the family home in Cherokee County for what should have been a routine custody exchange, the kind of transition that thousands of separated parents navigate every single week across this country without incident, without drama, and without consequence. He came to pick up his sons. He left without them, because when he arrived, Luke and Logan Springer were gone. The investigation that followed was both swift and devastating. Cherokee County sits in the far western tip of North Carolina, Nestled against the Great Smoky Mountains, a region of extraordinary natural beauty and close-knit communities where the loss of any child sends shockwaves through an entire county. Law enforcement responded immediately. What they found at the family home set in motion one of the most harrowing prosecutorial processes in the recent history of Western North Carolina. Investigators allege that on the evening of March 1st, 2024, the night before their father came to collect them, Luke and Logan Springer were placed in a bathtub by their mother, Genevieve Ellen Springer. What allegedly happened in that bathtub is the central allegation of a criminal case that has shaken Cherokee County and the broader Western North Carolina legal community to its core. Investigators allege that Genevieve Ellen Springer drowned her 4-year-old twin sons in that bathtub on the night of March 1st. The boy's father arrived the following morning. The custody exchange he had driven to complete never happened. Instead, he discovered the scene that investigators would later process as evidence. He was the one who found them. The weight of that discovery, what that father carried out of that house on March 2nd, 2024, is something that no parent should ever have to endure. Genevieve Ellen Springer was taken into custody by Cherokee County law enforcement. The charges filed against her reflected the severity of what investigators alleged she had done. In the months that followed the arrest, the Cherokee County District Attorney's Office undertook the legal process of determining what level of accountability the evidence demanded. And in May of 2024, just over 2 months after Luke and Logan lost their lives, prosecutors made a determination that sent an unambiguous message about how seriously this case was being treated. The case was ruled eligible for the death penalty. That designation is not made lightly in North Carolina. Capital punishment eligibility requires a specific legal threshold. The prosecution must demonstrate the presence of aggravating factors that elevate a case beyond even the most serious of criminal charges. The decision by Cherokee County prosecutors to pursue death penalty eligibility in the case of Genevieve Ellen Springer reflected their assessment of the evidence and the nature of the alleged offense. 2 4-year-old children, their own mother, a deliberate act in the space that should have been their home. The legal proceedings in Cherokee County have continued through the North Carolina court system with the careful, methodical pace that capital cases demand. Defense attorneys in capital proceedings are entitled to extensive pretrial processes, and the examination of evidence in a case of this magnitude requires time, expert analysis, and multiple layers of legal review. As of the production of this documentary, the case remained in active legal proceedings. What this case asks the Cherokee County community and the broader public to sit with is deeply uncomfortable. It asks us to reconcile the image of a mother with the allegations against her. It asks us to acknowledge that the bond between a parent and a child, which we rightly celebrate as one of the most powerful forces in human experience, can in some devastating cases become something that the law and the conscience of a community must confront directly and without flinching. Luke and Logan Springer were 4 years old. They had their whole lives ahead of them. They had a father who was on his way to take them home. They deserved to be there when he arrived. The Cherokee County community has not forgotten them. Child advocates across North Carolina have pointed to this case as a reminder of the importance of robust family court systems, attentive child welfare services, and the ongoing need for communities to pay attention when children's safety may be at risk. North Carolina's Child Protective Services can be reached through the NC Department of Health and Human Services. If you have concerns about a child's safety in your community, please do not wait and do not assume someone else has already made the call. That call could be the one that matters most. The legal process in Cherokee County will ultimately determine the full measure of accountability in this case. But the memory of Luke and Logan Springer, 2 4-year-old boys who deserved nothing more than to grow up in the mountains of Western North Carolina, belongs to all of us now. Their story matters. Their lives mattered. If the story of Luke and Logan Springer moved you, please take a moment to show your support for the families and victims whose stories are told on this channel. Don't forget to like this video. Every subscription tells the algorithm that stories like this one, stories that matter, stories that demand our attention, deserve to be seen. Case 3, Tammy Duckworth Boone, February 10, 2023, North Carolina. There are crimes that are committed in an instant. A moment of rage or panic that collapses years of a person's life into a single terrible decision. And then there are crimes that require a different kind of reckoning. Crimes in which the choices made reveal something about character, about complicity, about the willingness to participate in harm against another human being at their most vulnerable. The case of Tammy Duckworth Boone belongs to the second category. And the victim at the center of this case, Brandy Deal, was not only a woman whose life was cut short. She was a woman on the threshold of new life, days away from bringing a child into the world. Brandy Deal was 9 months pregnant on February the 10th, 2023. She was days away from becoming a mother. Whatever difficulties or tensions had surrounded her life in the weeks and months before that date, she was carrying within her the most fundamental expression of hope, a child not yet born, a future not yet written. That future was taken from her on February the 10th, 2023, in a shooting that North Carolina investigators and prosecutors would spend the next 2 years building a case around. Tammy Duckworth Boone was not the shooter. That distinction matters legally, and it matters narratively. But it does not diminish the weight of her involvement. Investigators determined that Boone acted as an accomplice in the shooting that claimed Brandy Deal's life. The specific charge that the legal process ultimately centered on was discharging a firearm into an occupied dwelling, the home where Brandy Deal was present on the night of February the 10th, along with obstruction of justice charges that reflected Boone's conduct in the aftermath of the crime. Obstruction of justice charges in cases like this one tell their own story. They speak to what a person does after a crime has been committed, to the choices made in the hours and days that follow when investigators are asking questions and the truth is still finding its way to the surface. Obstruction says, someone knew what had happened, someone had information that could have helped bring accountability faster, and someone chose instead to place obstacles between investigators and the truth. In a case involving the loss of a pregnant woman's life, those obstacles carry a particular moral weight. The legal process moved through the North Carolina court system over the 2 years following February the 10th, 2023. In May of 2025, more than 2 years after Brandy Deal lost her life, Tammy Duckworth Boone was sentenced in connection with her role in the case. The sentence handed down was approximately 6 years, reflecting the charges of discharging a firearm into an occupied dwelling and obstruction of justice. For the family and loved ones of Brandy Deal, the sentencing represented a moment of accountability, partial, as accountability in cases of great loss always feels, but meaningful nonetheless. The legal system had looked at what happened on February the 10th, 2023, had examined the role Tammy Duckworth Boone played, and had rendered a judgment. But Brandy Deal's story does not begin and end in a courtroom. She was a woman. She was a mother-to-be. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone known and loved in her community. The loss that February night extended outward from her to everyone who had been waiting for the arrival of her child, everyone who had been part of her world and expected to be part of the world she was building. North Carolina has, in recent years, worked to strengthen protections for pregnant women who are victims of violence. The recognition that an attack on a pregnant woman is an attack on 2 lives, even when the law processes them as one, has been at the center of advocacy efforts across the state. Cases like the one involving Brandy Deal are part of why that advocacy exists and why it matters. The sentence imposed on Tammy Duckworth Boone does not restore what was lost on February the 10th, 2023. No sentence can do that. But it stands as a statement from the North Carolina justice system that complicity in harm, the choice to participate, even from a distance, in the circumstances that lead to a life being lost, carries consequences. That statement matters for Brandy Deal. It matters for every person in North Carolina whose safety depends on a community that takes accountability seriously. Brandy Deal deserved to meet her child. She deserved the life she was about to begin. Her story will not be forgotten. If this story of justice and loss moved you, please take a moment to support the work we do on this channel. Don't forget to like this video. Your support ensures that stories like Brandy Deal's are never reduced to statistics, that every name we speak here is remembered. Case 4, Blanche Taylor Moore, October 7, 1986, Alamance County, North Carolina. Some stories take decades to fully tell. They begin quietly, in the ordinary spaces of everyday life, and they leave behind them a trail of grief that is mourned privately, explained away with reasonable-sounding answers, and only fully understood when someone finally decides to look at the entire picture all at once. The story of Blanche Taylor Moore is one of those stories. And when the full picture was finally assembled, when investigators, prosecutors, and the North Carolina justice system laid out the timeline of what Blanche Taylor Moore is believed to have done across more than 2 decades, the breadth of what they uncovered was unlike almost anything the state had seen before. This case begins not with the crime that ultimately led to Blanche Taylor Moore's conviction, but with a pattern that stretched back to 1966, and that, by the time it was fully understood, encompassed 4 individuals who had the misfortune of being closely connected to one woman in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. Blanche Taylor Moore was born and raised in Alamance County, North Carolina. By all outward appearances, she was a church-going woman of the South, the kind of person who showed up at potlucks and knew everyone's birthday, and spoke softly and dressed neatly, and gave no particular cause for alarm. She worked as a grocery store cashier for years. She attended religious services regularly. She was, in the estimation of most people who knew her, unremarkable in the best of ways. But Blanche Taylor Moore had a secret, and that secret, when it finally emerged, would lead investigators to one of the most extraordinary poisoning cases in North Carolina history. The story, as investigators ultimately reconstructed it, begins in 1966. That year, Blanche Taylor Moore's father, Parker Lee Kaiser, passed away. His death was mourned and processed as many deaths are, with sadness but without suspicion. He was her father. She was his daughter. Life moved on. But investigators who later reviewed the circumstances of Parker Lee Kaiser's death came to believe that arsenic poisoning had played a role in his passing. Years passed. Life in Alamance County continued. Blanche Taylor Moore married James Taylor. The marriage produced a life that appeared, from the outside, entirely ordinary. And then, in 1973, James Taylor lost his life. He was ill before he died. His death, at the time, did not trigger a criminal investigation. But years later, investigators would come to believe that James Taylor, too, had been subjected to arsenic poisoning at the hands of his wife. The years between 1973 and 1986 were years of apparent normalcy. Blanche Taylor Moore remarried. Her second husband was a man named Dwight Moore, a pastor in the Alamance County area. By most accounts, their relationship appeared stable. But in 1989, 3 years after the events that would ultimately lead to Blanche Taylor Moore's conviction, Dwight Moore became seriously ill. Toxicological analysis of his condition revealed arsenic poisoning. He survived. His survival would become one of the critical threads in the legal case that followed. The event that led directly to Blanche Taylor Moore's conviction occurred on October 7, 1986, though the full consequences would not unfold in the courtroom until years later. Her boyfriend at the time, Raymond Reed, had been in a relationship with her for years. He became ill. His condition deteriorated. On October 7, 1986, Raymond Reed lost his life. When investigators later examined the circumstances of his death, they found what toxicological analysis confirmed. Raymond Reed had died as a result of arsenic poisoning. The investigation that connected the dots between Raymond Reed's death, Dwight Moore's survival, and the earlier deaths of James Taylor and Parker Lee Kaiser was one of the most methodically assembled prosecutorial cases in North Carolina history. Arsenic poisoning cases are difficult to prosecute in part because arsenic is a substance that occurs naturally in the environment and can be found in trace amounts in many individuals. Building a case that proves deliberate, sustained, and intentional arsenic administration requires exhaustive forensic work, expert testimony, and a level of legal patience that the Alamance County prosecutorial team committed to fully. Blanche Taylor Moore was arrested. She stood trial. And in 1990, she was convicted of the first-degree murder of Raymond Reed. She was sentenced to death, the first woman in North Carolina's modern history to receive a death sentence. That sentence was later commuted, and she remained incarcerated at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. The case of Blanche Taylor Moore raised questions that extended far beyond the Alamance County courtroom. It raised questions about how a pattern of harm can persist across decades when the individual incidents are processed in isolation. It raised questions about the limitations of medical investigation when death occurs in a domestic context, and no one has yet assembled the larger picture. And it raised questions about the capacity of communities and legal systems to recognize evil when it presents itself quietly, in church clothes, with a soft voice and a casserole dish. The victims connected to Blanche Taylor Moore's history, Parker Lee Kaiser, James Taylor, Raymond Reed, and the surviving Dwight Moore, were all people who had trusted her. That trust was the mechanism of what she is alleged and convicted of having done. And for the families of those who did not survive, the decades between the early losses and the final legal reckoning were decades spent grieving without fully understanding why. North Carolina's justice system ultimately delivered accountability. The conviction of Blanche Taylor Moore in Alamance County stands as one of the most significant moments in the state's legal history, a reminder that no pattern of harm, however carefully concealed, can escape the reach of a thorough investigation and a determined prosecution. Raymond Reed deserved to live. James Taylor deserved to live. Parker Lee Kaiser deserved to live. Their names are spoken here not as footnotes to a sensational story, but as human beings whose lives mattered and whose losses demanded a reckoning that the North Carolina justice system ultimately provided. If this case moved you, this story of decades, of hidden harm, of a justice that finally came, please take a moment right now to support this channel and the work we do in honoring victims whose stories deserve to be told. Don't forget to like this video. Every like and every subscription is a way of saying that these stories matter. Case 5, Sierra Brian Frederick, March 26, 2026, Buncombe County, North Carolina. The mountains of western North Carolina carry a certain timelessness. Buncombe County, home to the city of Asheville, is a place of cultural richness, of music and art, of communities that have learned over generations to look out for one another in the way that mountain towns do. It is also a place where, on March the 26th, 2026, law enforcement officers responded to a call that would become one of the most disturbing cases in the county's recent history. Buncombe County Sheriff's deputies and investigators arrived to find a 10-month-old child, an infant, still in the earliest months of life, still entirely dependent on the adults around him for every aspect of survival, with injuries that immediately drew the attention of medical personnel and criminal investigators alike. The child had been subjected to harm so severe that investigators moved quickly to establish the circumstances and identify who was responsible. The infant's mother was Sierra Brian Frederick. In the hours following the discovery of the injured child, investigators pieced together what the evidence and witness accounts suggested had occurred. Sierra Brian Frederick was taken into custody by Buncombe County law enforcement on March the 26th, 2026. The charges filed against her were serious, reflecting the nature of the harm her 10-month-old son had suffered. A 10-month-old child cannot speak, cannot explain, cannot protect himself from anything or anyone. He is, in every measurable way, entirely vulnerable to the intentions of the adults responsible for his care. The case in Buncombe County also included a secondary allegation that added another dimension to the picture investigators were assembling. Sierra Brian Frederick was also accused of pursuing a man down her driveway with a knife, an incident that spoke to a pattern of behavior that the Buncombe County legal system would be called upon to fully examine. The combination of allegations, the harm to an infant and the threatening conduct toward another individual, presented a case that local prosecutors took with the utmost seriousness. Buncombe County, like many communities across North Carolina, has invested significantly in the infrastructure of child protective services and community-based intervention programs. The Asheville area has long been home to advocacy organizations focused on family wellness, child safety, and the resources that at-risk families need before a situation reaches a point of crisis. But when the safeguards that exist do not intercept the harm before it reaches a child, the criminal justice system becomes the last line of accountability. For the infant at the center of the Buncombe County case, the response of law enforcement on March the 26th, 2026, represented the moment when the system did its job. Medical personnel worked to address the child's injuries. Investigators built their case. Prosecutors prepared to bring Sierra Brian Frederick before the Buncombe County court system to answer for what the evidence alleged she had done to her most defenseless child. Active prosecutions like this one carry their own legal timeline, one shaped by the rights of the accused, the requirements of evidence disclosure, the scheduling of hearings and pretrial proceedings. The justice system's measured pace is not a failure. It is a feature of a legal structure designed to reach verdicts that are both accurate and defensible. As of the production of this documentary, the case of Sierra Brianne Frederick was proceeding through the Buncombe County court system. What communities take away from cases like this one is not despair, it is resolve. Resolve to strengthen the networks of observation and support that exist around young families. Resolve to make the reporting of child welfare concerns easy, accessible, and consequence-free for those who make the call in good faith. And resolve to ensure that the legal system continues to treat harm against the most vulnerable members of our society with the full gravity it deserves. The child at the center of this case deserved protection from his very first breath. He deserved the safety that every infant carries as a birthright, the safety of a home where he would be nurtured, not harmed. Buncombe County's law enforcement community acted when the call came. The court system is now doing its part. If you are concerned about a child's safety in your community, please reach out to the North Carolina Child Protective Services reporting line. Your call could be the one that makes the difference. Do not wait for someone else to make it. If this case moved you and you want to continue following the stories of North Carolina's most significant criminal cases, please show your support right now. Don't forget to like this video. Your engagement helps this community of truth seekers continue to grow. Case 6. Antoinette Davis, November 10, 2009, Cumberland County, North Carolina. There are cases that define a community's relationship with grief. Cases that become part of the permanent emotional landscape of a region, not because of their legal complexity or their forensic intrigue, but because of who the victim was and what was done to them. The case of Shania Davis is one of those cases for Cumberland County, North Carolina. More than 15 years after a 5-year-old girl was reported missing from her home in Fayetteville, her name is still spoken with the same tenderness and the same fury that accompanied the initial revelation of what had happened to her. Her face is still remembered, and the story of what her mother did, what Antoinette Davis chose to do, remains one of the most devastating chapters in North Carolina criminal history. Shania Davis was 5 years old. She had a smile that, in the photographs that became familiar to millions of Americans in the days following her disappearance, seemed to light up the space around her. She lived with her mother, Antoinette Davis, in Fayetteville, the Cumberland County city that is home to Fort Bragg and that carries, like so many military communities, a complicated mix of strength and struggle, of resilience and need. Shania was a little girl. She was beginning to understand the world. She had no capacity, none, to protect herself from what was about to happen to her. On November the 10th, 2009, Antoinette Davis reported her daughter Shania missing. The report set off an immediate and intensive law enforcement response in Cumberland County. The disappearance of a 5-year-old girl is treated by every professional law enforcement agency in the country as an emergency of the highest order, and Cumberland County investigators moved quickly. So did the broader law enforcement community. Shania's face was broadcast across North Carolina and beyond. Tips poured in. The search was urgent, comprehensive, and driven by the hope, the desperate, insistent hope, that she would be found alive. She was not. Shania Davis was found dead in Sanford, North Carolina, in Lee County, on November the 16th, 2009, less than a week after she had been reported missing. She was 5 years old. What happened to her in the days between her disappearance and her discovery had been, investigators determined, the result of one of the most profound betrayals a parent can commit against a child. The investigation revealed that Antoinette Davis had sold her daughter. She had taken the 5-year-old child in her care and had provided her to a man named Mario McNeil to settle a debt. What happened to Shania Davis after she was handed over to Mario McNeil is a chapter of this case that the full weight of North Carolina's criminal justice system sought to address through the prosecution of both individuals. McNeil was convicted of first-degree murder and other charges. He received the death penalty. Antoinette Davis faced her own legal reckoning. She was charged with human trafficking and second-degree murder in connection with the death of her daughter. In 2013, 4 years after Shania was taken from the world, Antoinette Davis pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and human trafficking. The guilty plea represented an acknowledgement, within the parameters of the legal process, that what she had done was criminal, that the choices she made led directly to the loss of her daughter's life. No sentence and no guilty plea can measure what was lost when Shania Davis did not come home on November the 10th, 2009. A 5-year-old girl. A smile that photographs captured forever because she did not grow up. A life that should have stretched out before her. School and friendship and the gradual discovery of who she was going to become ended at the age of 5 because her mother made a choice that no parent should ever be capable of making. The Cumberland County community mourned Shania Davis with a grief that did not diminish with time. Her case became a reference point in North Carolina's discussions about child welfare, about the vulnerability of children in households where adult needs override every parental instinct, about the importance of community networks that can see when a child is in danger before that danger becomes irreversible. North Carolina's human trafficking laws were strengthened in the years following Shania's case, with advocates pointing to her story as a catalyst for legislative attention to child protection. Her name carried weight in legislative chambers and in community conversations about what the state owed to its most vulnerable children. The conviction of Antoinette Davis did not close a wound. Wounds like the one left by Shania Davis's story do not close. But it provided the community of Cumberland County and the broader North Carolina community that had followed this case with heartbroken attention, with the knowledge that the legal system had looked at what Antoinette Davis had done, had weighed it, and had rendered a judgment. Shania Davis was 5 years old. She deserved every year that followed. She deserved to grow up in Cumberland County, to know the world in all its complexity, to become whoever she was going to be. Her story is told here not to exploit her loss, but to ensure that her name is never forgotten, that the circumstances of her death continue to inform the way communities protect their children, and that the accountability the North Carolina justice system delivered on her behalf is part of the permanent record. If you have any knowledge of or concerns about human trafficking in your community, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is available around the clock at 1-888-373-7888. Every call is confidential. Every call has the potential to protect a life. Shania Davis deserved better. So do the children whose safety depends on us paying attention today. Please take a moment right now to honor Shania's memory and support the stories we tell on this channel. Don't forget to like this video. The stories we tell here matter because the victims we speak for matter. Every single one of them. Case 7. Avani Devon, 2017 through 2019, Cumberland County, North Carolina. There is a particular category of harm that the legal system struggles to fully capture in its language. It is the harm that accumulates not in a single moment, but across months, across years. Harm so gradual and so thoroughly concealed that it does not announce itself with the urgency of an emergency call or the immediacy of a crime scene. It unfolds slowly, invisibly, behind closed doors, in the silences between the moments when the outside world sees what it expects to see. The case of Avani Devon is a case of that kind. And what investigators uncovered in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in April of 2024 was the physical evidence of harm that had begun 7 years earlier, harm that had been concealed so completely that its full extent was not known until the discovery of human remains in a burned barrel on a Cumberland County property. Avani Devon was a resident of the Fayetteville area. She was the adoptive mother of 2 children, a son named Blake and a daughter named London. Adoption is, in the most fundamental sense, a decision to extend the protections of family to a child who needs them. It is a commitment, legal, moral, and emotional, to provide safety, nurturing, and care to a child who has already, by the nature of the adoption process, experienced some degree of vulnerability. Blake and London were children who needed a home. Avani Devon provided them with one. And what happened inside that home, according to investigators and prosecutors in Cumberland County, represents a profound and catastrophic betrayal of everything adoption is meant to be. Investigators believe that Blake, Avani Devon's adopted son, lost his life in 2017. He would have been a young child at the time. His death was not reported. There was no funeral, no death certificate filed through proper channels, no notification of the authorities who, under North Carolina law, are required to be informed when a person dies. Blake simply ceased to be present in the world that the people outside that household could see. And no one, for years, asked why. London, Avani Devon's adopted daughter, is believed to have lost her life in 2019, 2 years after Blake. 2 years in which a household in Fayetteville continued to exist without the 2 children who had been placed in its care. 2 years in which whatever had happened was concealed, processed internally, and hidden from the community, the authorities, and the child welfare system that had placed those children in Avani Devon's home. The discovery that broke this case open came on April 12, 2024, years after the events investigators believe took the lives of Blake and London. On that date, human remains were found on a property connected to Avani Devon. The remains were discovered in a burned barrel. The forensic process of identifying those remains and connecting them to the 2 children who had disappeared from the records of the outside world began immediately, and the investigation that followed drew on the resources of the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, state forensic experts, and the prosecutorial team that would ultimately be charged with bringing Avani Devon to account. The charges filed against Avani Devon reflected the severity of what investigators believe occurred. Prosecutors in Cumberland County made clear that they intended to pursue this case with the full force of the law, and in a declaration that underscored the gravity of the alleged conduct, prosecutors indicated they would seek the death penalty. That decision, to pursue capital punishment in a case involving adopted children whose harm allegedly occurred over years and was concealed for nearly a decade, reflected the prosecutorial community's assessment of what the evidence revealed about the nature of what had been done. Cases involving long-term harm to children in the home carry a particular weight in the legal system and in the public consciousness. They raise questions that are painful to ask and uncomfortable to answer. How did this remain hidden for so long? What systems exist to monitor the welfare of children after they are placed in adoptive homes, and how might those systems be strengthened? What are the warning signs that a community, a neighbor, a school, or a social worker might recognize as signals that something is deeply wrong inside a home? These are not questions asked to assign blame to anyone other than the individual or individuals who are responsible for harm to children. They are questions asked because the answer to them, the process of strengthening child welfare monitoring, improving post-adoption support services, and building community awareness of the signs of child endangerment, is the answer that prevents the next case before it begins. Cumberland County's child welfare advocates, in the wake of the discovery on April 12, 2024, engaged in exactly that conversation. The Fayetteville community, a community that had already been shaped by the loss of Shania Davis years earlier, once again faced the requirement of sitting with an unimaginable loss and turning that grief into purpose. Blake and London were children who had been given a second chance at family. They were children who deserved the safety and love that adoption is designed to provide. Whatever happened to them in that Fayetteville home, whatever the full scope of the harm they experienced, happened to children who had no power to leave, no ability to call for help, and no one who intervened in time. That is the tragedy at the center of this case. And it is why the Cumberland County prosecutorial team's commitment to pursuing the fullest measure of accountability is so significant. The legal proceedings in the case of Avani Devon were ongoing as of the production of this documentary. Capital cases in North Carolina proceed through extensive pretrial processes, and the timeline for a trial of this magnitude will be shaped by the legal requirements of a capital proceeding. But the investigation is thorough, the charges are serious, and the commitment of Cumberland County's legal community to seeking justice for Blake and London is clear and unwavering. Blake and London deserved every protection that the system of adoption was designed to give them. They deserve to grow up. They deserve to have their names spoken with joy rather than grief. They are spoken here with the full weight of the respect and remembrance they deserve. Their story will not be forgotten. And the accountability that Cumberland County's legal system is working toward on their behalf is the response their lives demand. If you are concerned about the welfare of a child in an adoptive or foster placement, please contact the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Social Services. You can also contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. That call is free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day. If this story of loss, concealment, and the pursuit of justice moved you, please take a moment to support this channel and the work we do in giving voice to the children whose stories demand to be told. Don't forget to like this video. Every subscriber is part of a community committed to truth, accountability, and the remembrance of those who can no longer speak for themselves. Case 8, Andrea Morgan Faust, February 12, 2026. Durham County, North Carolina. Durham, North Carolina is a city in transformation, a place of universities and medical centers, of arts and innovation, of communities working through the complicated history of a southern city moving into a modern future. It is a city full of children playing in neighborhoods that range from newly renovated streets to communities still waiting for the investment they deserve. And on February the 12th, 2026, Durham became the location of a case that would raise deep and complicated questions not only about accountability, but about the intersection of mental health, criminal responsibility, and the protection of the youngest and most defenseless members of any community. Two children, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, were found unresponsive in their Durham home on February the 12th, 2026. Emergency responders were dispatched to the scene. Medical personnel worked urgently to address the conditions of both children. One of those children, the 2-year-old, did not survive. The 4-year-old received treatment and care. The loss of a 2-year-old child, in any context, is a moment of grief that extends far beyond the individuals immediately involved. It becomes, in the way that the loss of very young children always does, a community event, a reminder of the fragility of life and the weight of responsibility that comes with the care of those who cannot care for themselves. Andrea Morgan Faust was the mother of both children. She was identified by Durham investigators as the individual whose conduct was connected to the circumstances that led to her children being found unresponsive in their home. The Durham County legal process moved to charge her in connection with what had occurred on February the 12th, 2026. But the case of Andrea Morgan Faust took a turn that distinguishes it from many of the cases examined in this documentary, and that distinction is important. In March of 2026, approximately 1 month after the events at the Durham home, Andrea Morgan Faust underwent a legal competency evaluation as part of the pretrial process. The determination that followed was significant. She was found incapable of standing trial. That finding led to her being moved from the criminal justice system's custody to a psychiatric facility for evaluation and treatment. The legal standard of competency to stand trial is a concept with a long history in American jurisprudence. It is not the same as a finding of not guilty by reason of insanity, and it is important that this distinction be understood clearly. A finding of incompetency to stand trial means that, at the time of the legal proceeding, the individual lacks the cognitive and psychological capacity to understand the charges against them, to assist in their own defense, and to participate meaningfully in the legal process. It is a temporary status, one that can change over time as treatment and evaluation proceed. It does not end the criminal case. It pauses it, pending restoration of competency. This means that the accountability process in the case of Andrea Morgan Faust is not concluded. The criminal charges remain. The Durham County legal system retains jurisdiction. And when and if Andrea Morgan Faust is determined to have regained the competency to stand trial, that process will resume. The legal system's recognition that mental health is a factor in a criminal case is not an obstacle to accountability. It is a component of a justice system that attempts to respond to the full complexity of human circumstance. For the family of the 2-year-old child who did not survive the events of February the 12th, 2026, that complexity does not diminish the grief or the loss. A 2-year-old child lost his life. A 4-year-old child experienced events that no young child should ever have to experience. The family's grief exists regardless of the legal pathway by which accountability is ultimately pursued. The Durham case raises questions that mental health advocates, legal scholars, and child protection experts have been grappling with for generations. What is the appropriate response when a parent causes serious harm to a child and the evidence suggests that severe mental illness may be a factor? How does a justice system balance accountability with treatment? How does a community hold space simultaneously for grief over the loss of a child and compassion for the reality of untreated mental illness, while still insisting that the protection of children remains the paramount value? These questions do not have easy answers, but they are questions that Durham County, and North Carolina as a whole, is working through with the seriousness and care they deserve. The child advocacy community in Durham has used this case as part of a broader conversation about early mental health intervention, about postpartum and parental mental health resources, and about the systems that can when functioning properly, connect struggling parents with help before a situation reaches a point of irreversible harm. North Carolina's mental health support resources for parents include the NC Child and Family Support Line, available at 1-800-368-6958. If you are a parent struggling with mental health challenges, please reach out. Help is available, and seeking it is the strongest thing you can do for yourself and for your children. The 2-year-old child who did not come home from that Durham house on February the 12th, 2026, deserved every day of the life that was taken from him. His memory is honored here with the gravity and gentleness his short life deserves. The Durham County legal system is committed to pursuing the accountability this case demands, through whatever legal pathway that accountability ultimately takes. If this case moved you and you want to be part of the community that ensures stories like this one are told with care, dignity, and purpose, please show your support right now. Don't forget to like this video. We are here every step of the way, following every case, honoring every victim. Case 9, Reagan Powers, August 30th, 2025, Columbus County, North Carolina. Columbus County is one of the quieter corners of North Carolina. Tucked into the southeastern part of the state, it is a rural community where the pace of life is slower, where families know each other across generations, and where summer evenings are long and heavy with the particular heat of the Carolina coastal plain. It is a place where, on August the 30th, 2025, a house fire changed the lives of an entire community and claimed the lives of 4 little girls who should have been safe inside their home. The 4 daughters of Reagan Powers ranged in age from 2 to 7 years old. For children, for girls, the youngest barely old enough to form a complete sentence, the oldest still years away from double digits. They were children in the fullest sense of that word, young, dependent, full of the particular life that young children carry, the constant motion and noise and curiosity that turns a house into a home. They were in that house on the evening of August the 30th, 2025. And then there was a fire. The details of what investigators determined about the circumstances of that fire are the heart of this case. Not the fire itself, which moved with the terrible efficiency of fire, but the circumstances that preceded it. When Columbus County fire investigators and law enforcement personnel examined the evidence in the hours and days following the blaze, they were building an understanding of not only how the fire had occurred, but what had allowed it to become fatal. What investigators determined was this: Reagan Powers had left her 4 children, the 2-year-old, the children in between, the 7-year-old, in the care of an 11-year-old. Not a parent, not an adult, not a trained caregiver, an 11-year-old child. An 11-year-old is not equipped, by any reasonable standard, to bear sole supervisory responsibility for 4 children under the age of 8 in a residential structure. The legal standard in North Carolina and in most of the United States reflects this reality. Children below the age of 14 are generally not considered appropriate sole caregivers for young children, and leaving a child in a situation that creates unreasonable risk of harm is a criminal matter. The Columbus County investigation reached the conclusion that Reagan Powers had placed her children in a situation that foreseeably and ultimately fatally endangered them. Reagan Powers was charged with involuntary manslaughter in connection with the deaths of her 4 daughters. Involuntary manslaughter is a charge that, in North Carolina law, reflects a finding of reckless or negligent conduct. The absence of intent to cause death combined with the presence of conduct so careless or irresponsible that it created conditions under which death was a foreseeable outcome. The charge does not require that the accused intended harm. It requires only that the conduct fell so far below the standard of reasonable care that it constitutes criminal negligence. For 4 little girls, the distinction between intent and negligence does not change the outcome. They lost their lives in that Columbus County house fire on August the 30th, 2025. Whether that loss was the product of intent or the product of profound recklessness is a question the legal system processes and distinguishes. But the grief of a community that mourned 4 children from the ages of 2 to 7 is not shaped by legal categories. It is shaped by the absence of 4 small lives that were present and then were not. The Columbus County community responded to the loss with the generosity and closeness that rural North Carolina communities bring to tragedy. Neighbors, church groups, and community organizations came together to support the families involved, to grieve the children, and to begin the harder work of asking what could be learned and what could be done differently. Child safety advocates across North Carolina have pointed to the Columbus County case as part of a broader conversation about supervision standards, about the pressures that lead parents to make decisions about childcare that place children at risk, and about the community and systemic supports that can help families in need before a situation becomes a tragedy. In communities with limited access to affordable childcare, a reality across much of rural North Carolina, parents sometimes face impossible choices. That reality does not eliminate criminal responsibility, but it does point toward the kinds of community investments that can prevent tragedies before they occur. The four daughters of Reagan Powers deserve to be safe in their home on the night of August 30th, 2025. They deserve the supervision and care that the law and basic human responsibility requires. They deserve to grow up in Columbus County, to run through those long summer evenings, to become the people they were going to be. Their lives were short, but they were lives full of the particular brightness that young children carry, and they are remembered here with all the care and respect they deserve. The legal proceedings in the case of Reagan Powers were ongoing as of the production of this documentary. Columbus County's court system was working through the charges of involuntary manslaughter with the seriousness the case demands. If this story of loss and accountability moved you, please take a moment to support the work of this channel. Don't forget to like this video. Together, we make sure that stories like the story of four little girls in Columbus County are never forgotten. Case 10, Raja Drain, December 2nd, 2024, Bertie County, North Carolina. Bertie County sits in the northeastern corner of North Carolina, along the banks of the Roanoke River. It is one of the smallest counties in the state by population, a quiet, rural community where the spaces between neighbors are wide and the sounds of the natural world are more present than the sounds of the city. It is also one of the communities across North Carolina where the systems designed to protect the most vulnerable, the youngest, the most dependent, are stretched thinnest by geography and resources. And it is in Bertie County that, on December 2nd, 2024, a 2-year-old girl named Jamie lost her life. Jamie Drain was 2 years old. She was at the age when the world is just beginning to make sense, when a child is assembling, day by day, word by word, experience by experience, the building blocks of a self. She was walking. She was beginning to speak. She was learning what safety felt like and what the faces of the people around her meant. She was, in every possible way, at the beginning. And on December 2nd, 2024, what should have been another ordinary day in the ordinary building of that young life ended in a way that sent Bertie County investigators into one of the most serious and urgent investigations the county had undertaken in years. Jamie Drain was brought to medical attention on December 2nd, 2024, with injuries that medical personnel immediately recognized as the result of severe harm. The nature of those injuries, which investigators described in terms consistent with the application of significant physical force to a 2-year-old child, triggered the mandatory reporting protocols that connect medical institutions to law enforcement in cases of suspected child abuse. Bertie County law enforcement was notified. Investigators responded. Jamie did not survive her injuries. The investigation that followed moved quickly to identify the individual responsible for what had happened to Jamie Drain. Her mother, Raja Drain, became the focus of the Bertie County investigation. The evidence assembled by investigators pointed to Raja Drain as the person responsible for the injuries that claimed her daughter's life. Criminal charges were filed. But Raja Drain was not in Bertie County when investigators sought to take her into custody. She had left North Carolina. The case became, in addition to a homicide investigation, a fugitive apprehension case, requiring coordination between Bertie County law enforcement, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and law enforcement agencies in other states. The search for Raja Drain extended for months, reaching across state lines into the Northeast. In September of 2025, 9 months after Jamie Drain lost her life on December 2nd, 2024, Raja Drain was located and apprehended in Connecticut. The arrest, made possible by the coordination of North Carolina and Connecticut law enforcement, represented a significant moment in the pursuit of accountability for Jamie's death. The distance Raja Drain had placed between herself and Bertie County did not insulate her from the reach of North Carolina's legal system. The charges that had been filed were waiting. The investigation that had been built was thorough. And the extradition process, the legal mechanism by which a person apprehended in one state is returned to face charges in another, moved Raja Drain back to North Carolina to answer for what the evidence alleged she had done. The extradition of Raja Drain to North Carolina was completed, and she was returned to Bertie County to face the charges filed in connection with the death of her daughter Jamie. The legal proceedings in Bertie County were ongoing as of the production of this documentary. The case of Jamie Drain is, at its core, the story of a 2-year-old child in a small county in northeastern North Carolina who deserved the protection that the law and basic human decency demand for children of her age. She was entirely dependent on the adults around her. She had no capacity to seek help, to leave a dangerous situation, or to communicate the nature of what she was experiencing to anyone outside the walls of her home. She was, in the most complete sense, at the mercy of the person responsible for her care. Bertie County is a community that mobilized around the loss of Jamie Drain with the determination that small communities bring to the cases that strike them most deeply. Local law enforcement pursued this case across state lines and across 9 months of investigation with a commitment to accountability that reflected the value they placed on Jamie's life and the seriousness with which they treated the harm done to her. The extradition of Raja Drain from Connecticut to North Carolina sent a message that resonates beyond the borders of Bertie County, that the pursuit of justice for a 2-year-old child does not end at a county line or a state border, that the legal system has long arms when the case demands them, and that the life of a child in a small, rural North Carolina county carries the same weight and commands the same legal resources as a case anywhere else in the state. Jamie Drain was 2 years old. She was just beginning. Her life deserved every year that was taken from her. Her name is spoken here with the full weight of the grief and the determination that her story deserves, and the accountability that the Bertie County legal system is pursuing on her behalf is the answer her life demands. If you have information about child abuse or neglect in North Carolina, please contact the NC Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Line at 1-800-422-4453. Your report is confidential. Your call matters. Every call has the potential to save a life. And to every person watching this documentary, thank you for being part of a community that believes these stories matter. Thank you for staying with us through 10 cases, 10 communities, and 10 names that deserve to be remembered. The work of documenting these stories, of honoring these victims, of holding the legal system accountable for the pursuit of justice, continues because of your support. Don't forget to like this video. If you stayed until the end of this documentary, please leave a comment below with the name of the victim whose story moved you most. Your comment keeps these stories visible and keeps this community of truth seekers growing. We will be back with more cases, more communities, and more stories that the people of North Carolina and beyond deserve to have told.